Good evening, and thank you for joining the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park for tonight's Community Voices program. This program is being presented using the webinar version of Zoom, and attendees are joining in listening mode only. Please send any and all questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer all questions within the time we've allotted. Should you get disconnected, simply use the link that was emailed to you earlier to get back into the program. I will now turn it over to our moderator for tonight, Lou Toscano.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Amanda. Welcome to Community Voices, a monthly program that explores in depth the individuals, groups, and historical events that inform the character in our local area. The series grew out of a desire to better unite us by bridging our differences. Each month, we'll focus on a singular aspect of life in our community. We hope you will join us regularly as we highlight the people, the customs, the folklore of life in this Westerly Pawcatuck area. The program is for you and about you, so please contact us if you have a story to tell. I'm delighted tonight to present two very well-respected and active people in our community. We have with us April Dinwoodie and Kevin Lowther, Big Lux. Born in Boston and adopted into the Westerly community, April Dinwoodie is a Black, biracial, transracially adopted person and nationally recognized thought leader on adoption, foster care, and multiracial families. After years of branding and communications work in industries ranging from retail fashion to airlines, April committed fully to her personal passions as the chief executive of the Donaldson Adoption Institute. She's the founder of Adoptment, a mentoring program that matches foster youth with adopted adults, and hosts Born in June, Raised in April, What Adoption Can Teach the World, a podcast about adoption, identity, and family. April's work centers on helping individuals, families, corporations, nonprofits, schools, and other government agencies to build skills and capacity to embrace differences of family structure, as well as race and culture and class. Kevin Lowther, known as Big Lux, is a musician, activist, writer, and arts leader. He graduated from West Point, served 13 years as an officer in the Army, earning combat decorations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has spoken and performed on the TED stage. He now serves on the Westerly Planning Board, teaches at Community Music Works in Providence, and manages the Balamio Dance Company. We couldn't be happier and prouder to have these two amazing citizens as part of our community and presenting our program tonight. Thank you both for joining us. So what I would like to do, if you don't mind for a minute, start by, telling you and the participants that, the reason that this committee developed was that so we could have less of this and more of this, more conversation that leads to understanding. And those are the things that your lives have been inundated with over the last couple of years. So I'd love to know, if you could help us, the history of the Anti-Racism Coalition and what prompted you both to become so heavily involved in it. Focusing on whether it was a particular incident or something in your lives here in Westerly or elsewhere. Anyone who wants to take it? April?
Would you like me to jump in?
Go ahead, sure.
Okay, so thanks for the warm welcome. Thanks to everyone on the committee, and thanks to Amanda for creating such a great space. And you did so with such intention and such planning and thought, and I'm grateful for that. And also obviously to the leadership at the library in Wilcox Park. So last May, I think late May, I think it was, I was driving through the center of town. I had been back because of the pandemic. I came in March and then fully moved back in June. And on my way through town to Pawcatuck to visit friends on a Sunday following the murder of George Floyd, there was a gathering in the center of town, and it was a protest. And I literally did a double take, had to pull my car over because I was crying. And having had the life I've lived here in Westerly for the first 17 years of my life, which was filled with joy and goodness and love of my family and community, I also, right next to that, talk about this versus this, the tension of having been different and other in this town, and not seen for my full identity as being a Black biracial woman. Oftentimes it was, we don't see color, but there were things that happened to me that were certainly about race and racism. So when I saw that, I really thought to myself, I didn't expect it, because we've so long, I think, as a broad stroke in this town, not addressed race and racism. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad place or that there are bad people here. It just means that we feel as though it's better, I think, as a collective, my experience, to not look at that. It's too hard, or it's just not true about Westerly. And so to see that group of people, I was like, wow. So the next week I was there, and the week after, the week after, the week after, the week after that. And soon enough, what you find, at least for me, when active in activism and advocacy, there's only but so long that you can hold a sign and be raising your voice without doing something formal as an opportunity to be in service of change. So it's a both and for me. It's both holding the sign, it's both raising the voice, it's both having community and conversation within that space and time on Sunday mornings. And it's also about, what does this look like to organize and become more invested in real transitional change in this town. So there's a lot more to do with that, but that's ultimately how I got involved in the protests. And then with that, a small group of us decided there's actually some fundamental and foundational work to do through ARC, the Westerly Anti-Racism Coalition. So I can let Kevin give his version of his why.
Yeah, and it is extremely, extremely similar. I mean, I feel like I had that exact same. It may have been even the exact same protest. I know I was driving on the way to a gig that I had in Mystic at Angie's Pizza, and I saw the protests. But not only with the protests, I also saw, a line of law enforcement officers, about 8. I'd never seen that many police together in Westerly in my entire life. And so at the same time, I felt all of this hope and real joy that, like a protest came together in the town that I grew up, that had really avoided any kind of mention or progress on racial issues. According to pretty much everybody, when I'd grown up, basically, I graduated from Wesley High School in 2000. They were like, this is done. Race stuff is over. We're a post-racial society, so this is fine. And then to drive by and see that, like a line of white police officers, and to see that we were protesting, I was like, we are going to have to do some work to make sure that this does not turn into something else, something that's not supposed to be, something that is unsafe for lots of people. But I also had the great fortune to be able to do a lot of protesting in Providence and in New York that summer. Obviously, the protests that really sparked with the whole week of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd all being killed within really close proximity of each other. It just brought a lot of energy to social justice movements, and to be able to be a part of that was very empowering for me. But between that moment of seeing the protest in Westerly and then seeing the election and what happened later that fall, and there were lots of questions asked to the candidates about for town council, for the school committee, for state representative positions, lots of questions asked about social justice issues. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the answers that I heard were horrifying. That I could not believe that some of these people were going to be representing me and my interests in government. And it just stems from a place where people had not engaged with racial issues because they had thought it was done. They had thought it was over, and they just had not put the thought towards it. So I realized that we were going to have to bring it to them, and in a way that they could understand, in a way with grace and compassion, to show, hey, we're here, we're your citizens too. And so that's where I really wanted to become involved.
Well, you know, I thought you made a really good point about your concern that it might become something that it really wasn't, you know, and based on the misunderstanding of what the reasons for gathering on the post office steps were. But I think that I mean, I know there have been some negative things that have happened about cars driving by and comments being thrown out. But would you say that overall, the growth of those Sunday morning gatherings have become more positively oriented or more directed towards growth than early on? What do you think?
I do. I think that I think positivity can also be loud, and positivity can be have an edge to it. I think that that's okay. That's what diversity looks like, right? It looks like different voices with different tenors and tones and different things to say. So what I think has happened on Sundays, though, is this leaning into building a community and anchoring in education and a spirit of coming together, raising our voices, being very clear that we are about systematic change and about honoring all persons, and particularly protecting persons of color. And at the same time, we have an open way in which we bring in a lending library. We bring in performances. We have this almost like it's like Sunday sermon. It's like a grounding space now. But it doesn't mean that our words are any less sharp. They're just presented in a slightly different way, which is the way we move with ARC, very much rooted in not blaming or shaming, not thinking we're going to fix racism, not representing all persons of color, but to open a door to say, for all those folks who may think we're in a post-racial society, that racism doesn't live in Westerly, that it systematically doesn't impact persons of color, that there's an open invitation to come and learn and grow and be willing to reflect and look at our own systems in Westerly. So that's why we want to do some more very focused and tactical things. But the Sundays are really a place where we can kind of breathe and be together in community. And that is, I think, a beautiful thing.
Great. Well, you know, it's funny, you mentioned that, and it was one of the questions I was going to ask later, but I want to just kind of lean into that. Is two things. Was ARC, Anti-Racism Coalition, is it the Westerly ARC, or is it a branch of a more broadly organized organization? You know what I mean? Did you form Westerly ARC on your own with your group that gathered? And the second part of that is, what are the other programs and activities and things that you just mentioned that the group wants to create or encourage participation in?
Well, I can I'll take the first part of that, and I'll leave the programs to April on this one.
Great.
But it is a standalone organization, and really, organization is maybe even be too strong of a word, for what we are. It's a loose coalition of the protesters, of like the most dedicated protesters who have been out there, who all kind of saw the same need to be filled within the community. We definitely we want to be in communication with other groups that are like us, but we're not formally affiliated with anything, not formally affiliated with Black Lives Matter, not formally affiliated with, you know, NAACP, any other social justice group. We thought it was really important to have a group that was just for us, even, you know, and there's lots of really good social justice work that's been happening and ongoing within the greater, you know, Westerly Stonington area. And a lot of us were in contact with those groups, and in those conversations and talking to other activists, we found that we had so much that we just wanted to focus on in our own community. We thought it would be best if we just concentrated our energy on our own organization, spend the time and the emotional effort and capital to figure out who we really are, what we really want to do, what are our goals, what are our measures, how do we achieve our objectives, and what is that going to look like. And that all of that thought, effort, and research, that's what turned into the ARC and its mission. And so with that, I'll
Yeah.
turn that over to
No, I'm so glad to hear you say that you wanted to start with your own community. That's much more manageable than starting with something wider, right?
Amen. Amen. And it was really very practical, because for me, and I think the spirit of the other folks that are the founding members of ARC, it was one thing, again, to be raising our voices. It's great to be there on Sunday. And so what now? What? Like, so now what do we do? Well, what do we want? Because guess what? When we are present, there are people that come and say, so what do you want to see changed? Right? Like, so wait, we have to answer these questions. So we know that activism requires action and strategy. So when you have several folks that are feeling the same way, you're like, well, this person can do this, that person can do that, this person's good at this, we all care about that, so Westerly ARC. And we did do a very process-driven structure. We did research. We have what's called an OGSM, which is objectives, strategies, goals, measures, right? Like, so there's a process by which we have organized ourselves to say, we want to do certain things. There are certain things that matter to us, right? Education, empowerment, and multiculturalism as a pathway to anti-racism, right? So we know that anti-racism isn't going to cure itself. And so the pillars of our work really are grounded in finding ways to empower leaders here, to be very clear that there is probably something that is about growth and learning and a different kind of movement that, you know, ARC can help provide and pave the way for. There is an opportunity to learn through our lending library, through storytelling, through presentations, and through multiculturalism. We're putting together a multicultural calendar, a way in which this community and others around us can tell us what they're doing, why it's important, how it can help us be more multicultural and anti-racist. And those events will be vetted and will be posted on a calendar. And any and all things that we share, we want there to be context and an opening for conversation. So we'd love to do more conversations like this. There are 4 areas that we're really in tune with. That's voting rights, education, which is about critical race theory, about truth telling in education, and bringing the history that is often left out of education to bear, and to make sure that leaders in education can teach that to our children responsibly and effectively. Housing, fair housing, right, and affordable housing, and policing. So there are 4 areas in which we're looking at legislation, going deep, and hoping to find research in our own backyard that will help us knit together what needs to be done more systematically in Westerly.
Super. Now, you have a Facebook page, correct? And people can access that, ARC or
Westerly ARC, both Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
We're hoping to share, you know, more resources, and really, to me, it is about context and education. It isn't just read this book. It's read this book and ask yourself these reflection questions. Have a conversation with a buddy. Reach out to us if you want to come and talk on a Sunday about something that you're not quite sure about. It's not that we're the experts, but we're certainly open to conversation and to processing some of the harder things, because there's a lot of hard things that we're seeing, but also where's the joy? We have poetry readings, and can you look beyond something that you like that sounds good, maybe a song that Lux plays, but let's look at who wrote it and where it came from, and what's the diversity message in that for all of us to consume and to understand.
Now, those activities that you talk about putting on a calendar and discussing certainly take manpower and woman power, but money as well. How have you dealt with that aspect of your organization? Tough one.
I will say so far that we we are all volunteers, and the only donations that we have received in the form of things that we can donate to other charitable organizations, notably the Warm Shelter. We've been taking in toiletries to donate to that organization. We're not a 501c3. We are not a formal corporate organization of any kind. So it is really through the hard work and sweat and bootstrapping of all of the people who have volunteered for us. Or we've not paid for anything or made any expenditures. We are very fortunate that we live in an age where social media is free, and it's one of the best ways to get our message out. And that's where we are right now. I think we are fine with not having to deal with the additional headaches that might come with money. But as we grow, we'll have to tackle those questions.
So April,
if I may, just real
Yeah.
quick, I do think it would make sense. I'd love to just name the founding members of ARC, if that's okay with you. I'd just like for folks to know. Ann Pierce, Bug Selico, Kayla Kennedy, Leslie Dunn, Rana Hamlin, and Madeline Labriola. And of course, Kevin and myself. So those are the core group of us. We meet on Tuesday nights via Zoom and put in a lot of our blood, sweat, and tears, and our brains and our hearts into what we're building, in hopes to grow it and hopes to bring in more volunteers. We have a lot of folks that are doing some research for us, that are looking at different bills and looking at researching what is going on in other communities. So we do have other folks that are helping us as well, that have been steady participants and steadfast at the Sunday protests. So thank you for letting me.
Oh, no problem. What you talked about was very broad, April, and I guess I'm wondering, is there a program in the future that you might sponsor, whether it's on Zoom or a live type of presentation sponsored by ARC to get more people to become aware of it? You know what I mean? Is there anything like that in the offing?
Sure, I do think so. I mean, one of our pillars is education, and obviously linked to multiculturalism, and always linked to anti-racism. So the idea would be to really, while we are working to help, we hope, the town leadership in ways to be more motivated and to be more educated themselves on the things that would be really in service of a changing Westerly, a changing in good ways. But at the same time, we think in order to, and that's so important for leadership. Like we need leadership to lean into some of the harder things, and to model what it looks like to learn and grow, and to maybe go back to some of those original statements about racism doesn't live in Westerly, and maybe say, well, guess what? There are some things that we could probably lean into. That would be a beautiful thing to be able to think about and talk about. And at the same time, the community, I think, needs space to be in practice about some of these harder things. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell, the author, has this theory of 10,000 hours. It takes 10,000 hours to become expert at something, whether that's shooting hoops, whether that's knitting, regardless of what it is. So many of us don't have very many hours logged in having really transformational conversations about these hard things, specifically in a community like Westerly that has thought it better or more elevated to not see it. So we would love to make spaces in partnership with other organizations as well to say, what does it look like to be able to be in an intentionally curated and safe space for folks to come in to say, well, I don't know what Juneteenth is. What does that mean? Or why is that important? And can we talk about critical race theory and why? And we've had some contentious conversations about just generally in the town about certain artifacts and things that are around us, but that's a gateway to understanding history. And that's a gateway to saying, well, all history matters, right? So where can we bring in some new ways to look at history, but to do so not in a bulldozing way, but in a way that's going to be safe for folks. I mean, it is not the easiest thing as a person of color to be raising my hand and showing myself to say, no, what we think worked in the first 17 years of my life in Westerly and what hung on the edges for experiences that I care not to remember or play back isn't going to work anymore. And we have now been in a space where we can have a point of pride that we haven't had a horrible headline in this town, but let's keep it that way, right? Let's work in service of making sure that never happens in this town.
One of the things that we talked about when the committee first thought about having you both on to discuss this, one of the questions that popped up is, what are the things that a community can do to stem the tide of any systemic racism and foster the equal treatment of other people? That was a big issue for us, and that's why we I think thought about considering you as experts in terms of what you need from a community, not just this community, but a community. And to go along with that is the involvement of other community leaders and what their place is in this. Have you had conversations and discussions with community leaders about what might need to be done in the future? Not maybe tomorrow, but in the future.
Kevin, I'll take the first part. Why don't you take the second part? Does that work?
Yeah.
So I think what do we need? I think the first thing is some reflection and some qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis. One of the things that's very interesting is that when folks say that racism doesn't live here, but then have not looked at data and statistics for this town, we need to fix that, because if we're tracking with the rest of the world, if we're tracking even with the state of Rhode Island, let's say, so the state of Rhode Island Department of Education in 2015, 2016, minority students made up 41% of the population, but accounted for 54% of the in-school and out-of-school suspensions, right? So when you look at that disparity, when you look at that one piece of data, which you can find on the DOE website, it's easy to find, that tracks with national averages, which is Black and brown kids and kids of color get suspended at a higher rate than their white peers. Okay, so there's data that's around. First, we have to really look at facts, right? So we've got data that we can look at and pull. That's all part of what we hope to become a town committee that really says, like, let's investigate. We can't speak on something without the full information. So we need data, and then we need quantitative data, but we also need qualitative and anecdotal evidence, which comes in the form of storytelling, comes in the form of making sure that there's a space for persons of color to say, this is my experience. This is what I'd like to see happen better. We know when we start to experience Westerly new in different ways through the many things that are happening in this town, United Theater being just one of them, that we will be embracing all kinds of new people into this town. Will we be ready? So we have a window of opportunity now to say, let's look closely at some of what happens. How many people get pulled over? What are their races? What happens? Do they get ticketed? Do they get arrested, convicted, all those things? We need to look at that data, not to say, oh, this police force is bad, but just to be smarter. We got to start there. Let's say we don't like the data in any one of these places. There's a meaningful way that we can make change with that. So with that, Kevin, you can share what we've been, talking about with some leaders.
Great.
Yeah. And, and a lot of what April just was talking about in terms of data collection and the need for it was one of those things that we did bring to the leadership of the town. We've had 3 separate, private meetings with meeting with leaders of the town, with the school committee, the town council, as well as law enforcement leadership. And we've had some extremely productive conversations, basically the heart of which have been us explaining our stories to them, who we are, our experiences in Westerly as people of color or as allies, um, why it is important for us to protest, the importance of keeping those protests safe, for everyone, and then some of those things that as leaders we recommend that we have in this community in order to bring people together. And the data collection was one of those things. We're trying to create more safe spaces for conversations, more education. So all of the themes that we've been talking about during this panel, those are the kind of issues that we're bringing up. And and we decided to do those meetings in private because, again, to another one of April's points is, because a lot of those leaders have not had their 10,000 hours yet, and we don't want to put them in front of the town to answer for these things before they've, even put in their first 100 hours. That's not a productive conversation. That turns into something that quickly turns into this. and
Yeah.
and that's 100% not where we wanted to be. So we've had some good productive conversations with leadership in the town.
To be clear, you're not protesting the pitfalls and the faults of Westerly. You're really protesting the ideas and trying to get Westerly to think about those ideas. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, I see it as small town, big opportunity. That's how I keep saying to myself, like small town, big opportunity. We know that there are things by personal experience and an aggregate of other folks that are persons of color that will share personal narratives as well that aren't necessarily good ones, right? But that doesn't mean that there's one thing that we would say, chop it off at the knees. This is a bad place to live and all the things. No, it's a beautiful place to live. And it could be even more beautiful if there were more intention in how we look at diversity and how we look at anything systemic that might be living here. And we want to do that with a lot of grace and like intention and structure behind it, not to just have these conversations that don't go anywhere. And, and to be clear, it was I think it was a real show of grace, and not that we get a pat on the back, but I just have done some of this stuff for a long time and I know what works and what doesn't work. And it's not going to work to build a big event with a lot of community leaders that haven't had a couple of conversations first to know where we are. And I wanted them to know us. We wanted them to know us, and we wanted to know them. And these meetings did not violate any of the Open Meetings Act either, just in case anybody's wondering. These were not like clandestine private things. These were opportunities to have a starting place of a conversation, and to start a relationship, because without relationships, there's just no way anything is going to move forward. So this is not protesting, Westerly as a whole. This is saying we have an opportunity. We know what's happening broadly. We know also what's happening close in, and without some more like real discovery that's intentional, we won't know exactly what's going to need to happen. There have been other organizations like this or coalitions popping up in small towns across the country. Westerly is not unique, and ARC is not unique. We don't know what we don't know yet. So as we go on this like path of discovery, we'll learn together, and we'll be able to say together, hey, look, like we found this. What can we do about that? So I hope that makes sense to folks, because it's a journey. It's not, these things aren't going to be like snip, snap and done. We don't fancy ourselves to know all the answers, but we certainly have some ideas.
April, when we spoke about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, you called it meeting the moment. And could you just reflect on that term for a little bit?
Again, I have to let out a sigh because, I think Kevin and I, and many of us in our, especially the persons of color, we make it look easy. We make some of this, steering into these hard things easy. And look, we volunteer to do this. No one's forcing us to do it. But part of that for me is facing what is upon us right now that no one really could foresee, that is punctuated by a pandemic, and also all the things that we know in terms of what is happening to Black and brown persons and Asian persons in this country in this moment. So we could have years past been saying, oh, there's nothing to see here, let's go to the beach and have a grinder. We could say that before, and that didn't work for me then. It doesn't work for me now, but it certainly isn't acceptable or even smart. It's actually urgent. We've now have to move with urgency in service of making sure that Westerly stays a beautiful place, and not by pushing people out, but by pulling people in, and doing so with love, with real authenticity, with an understanding that there are some things that have not been fairly put upon Black and brown and Asian persons in this country. So, and in this community as well. So meeting the moment for me means like not turning away at this point. The worst thing we could do right now is to turn away from education, to stop talking to each other, to stay in our corners and not be giving grace. So that's what it means for me. And doing this and having these kinds of conversations is healing for me. It's part of a hopeful moment that I feel like, oh my gosh, like I think we can actually do something here. And that right next to the times when I have to just let it out and cry and, take a break.
Yep. It's funny you should say that, because, in that same conversation a week or 10 days ago, Kevin, I mentioned to you about one of the hardest thing about this, and you really said something that struck me, and I think about it still, is that it's always in your consciousness. It's always present in your mind, and you talked about the cost to the people that are doing the work that you and April have been doing. So I'd love it if you could just take a minute and reflect on that idea for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, as a person of color, um, especially as people of color who exist in primarily white spaces, which is definitely kind of where we are in Southern Rhode Island. um, you always have to move in a certain way, and you always have to be aware. You always have to be aware of your surroundings. And I know April always talks about this just very, very eloquently. That the pandemic gave us a kind of a terrible opportunity for for everybody to understand what it's like to have to move through the world very conscientiously. With regards to like how far apart we are, like where your mask is on your face, or what you're wearing, or what you're doing, and that other people could be judging you for your actions just by walking down the street and how you present yourself. And these are the kinds of issues that people of color face every day. And if I'm a big guy and I'm in an elevator, and like I just have to be aware that I might make some people uncomfortable, like and some of it just might be me being male, some of it might be my size, some of it might be my race, and some those things are really, really hard to unravel with each other. And I would say that that's almost the most insidious part of it, is that you're just like you're never 100% sure why you are being treated differently, if you're being treated differently. You know, it could be all kinds of things, and so it just has to stay in the back of your mind, and you have to be kind of active and aware, and you always have to kind of have your radar up for it. And so that's just living as a person of color, and then you bring in the activism part of it to it too, and then you kind of put a little bit of a target on your back, because obviously there's a lot of people who don't believe what we believe, that Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, you know. um but or they claim that they believe it and just say that, you know, we don't need that anymore because, you know, everybody is, you know, everybody's the same. So yeah, so there is a real cost, in addition to just the everyday going through life. You know, when you're actually out there, when you're putting yourself into the line of fire, and in terms of emotional energy, and then just the actual physical energy of going and volunteering all of this time and doing these things. We are, you know, we're all volunteers. It takes a lot of time, you know. It takes a lot of energy, and we're writing and we're researching and we're meeting and we're you know, and we're, you know, at times we're doing this with each other inside the group, because we're all very different people with very different racial and gender identities, and, you know, we all think about things very differently. And so that's difficult work for us to do on our own. So for all of these reasons, yeah, that just makes it you know, I hope that other people see that, and they understand that there are sacrifices being made, and that we want to do it. We want to do it anyway. We think it's that important for us to be standing there on the post office steps.
You also made an amazing point about your time in the service and in many other countries. I wonder if you might take a minute and talk about how that opened your eyes when you saw other countries and other cultures.
Oh yeah, and for sure. And so yeah, I was active duty for 13 years. I spent most of that time overseas, in Germany, um, traveled a lot around Europe, was deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, spent some time in Korea. I did an exchange program to Chile. In my current role, I've been deployed to South and Central America. And so I've gotten to really see the breadth of the way different governments operate, the way that different cultures operate. And it's taught me a lot. It's given me a lot of perspective. Um, you know, you can see everything from societies that have real hard and fast castes, like a caste society like India, that, you know, you were born into a caste, that's it. And like, I mean, and that is completely class related. And, you know, so you have complete class segregation and discrimination. And then, you know, I live in places like, or deployed to places like Kuwait in the Middle East, where you have um, an informal caste system, where you have a lot of guest workers brought over from India and the Philippines, and they do all the manual labor, and, you know, will have no political say, and they'll never rise above a certain level in their jobs. And the Kuwaitis will always be the dominant cultural force, no matter how many of other, you know, ethnicities they have in their country. You have places like Korea that is like a completely um, you know, Korea is a society that has basically all Koreans. It's a peninsula, and, you know, they never really did very much intermixing with any other kinds of ethnicities, and so they believe that their, you know, their blood is pure, and so they are just very recently having to deal with other people and other immigrants coming into their country, and so they've never even really had, they don't understand multiculturalism at all, because they've had one culture for their entire peninsula, like Japan and Korea, for, like, you know, thousands of years. So um, every country deals with multiculturalism in their own unique way, and we all have problems. But there is definitely hope for every single society, and I see progress in every place I've been. I've always seen like progress as we go. Um, and I guess the second part of it is that the one thing that doesn't give me hope is the places that are extremely broken, like Iraq and Afghanistan, where the governments are so broken that the people feel like that they have to compete against each other for everything, for every last resource, whether it's just like who owns this road to this other building. Like, you know, they'll put barriers so the other people, so the other guy can't get over there. That complete breakdown is a complete breakdown in the understanding of common good, so that Sunnis and Shiites and Kurds in Iraq no longer have a sense that they are all Iraqi and they want to do things that are good for all Iraqis. They only want to do things that are good for Sunnis, Shiites, or Kurds. And it was extremely discouraging to be in the middle of that for a year and a half, basically watching them kill each other, blow up each other's roads, and cut off each other's services. And in the end, they're just left with a completely broken country. And that is my nightmare, that we as a country head in that direction and we have no more sense of the common good. We can't look across political, racial, ethnic, gender, all these, you know, demographics and say like, you know, that's my brother, that's my sister. We have differences, but there's something good that can happen that's going to raise all of our boats. So yeah, those are my experiences.
You should consider yourself lucky to have had that perspective. We should all somehow have that, right? April, we talked a little bit about a House bill in the legislature, House Bill like 6070, that was recently introduced. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where it stands and what it is meant to do?
Yeah, so there's a trend in states right now, in communities, that is really about taking out any critical race theory, really removing that which speaks to the history and the reality that has been in this country. And it's for Rhode Island, it's House Bill 6070. It was introduced by 3 Republican senators. And for now, it's out for further discovery. So we don't know what will happen with that. There's a lot of debate about this, and my big urgent headline is, now is not the time to steer away from education. Now is not the time to steer away from history, because grown-ups believe that it would be easier or better to deny the realities of what has happened. And at the same time, I also believe in the fact that we need a high degree of professional development and a way in which leaders in schools and teachers can internalize this content, and the way in which it can be instructed and delivered that is safe and appropriate, which is a big lift. It's a big lift. We talk about that 10,000 hours, and it becomes very individual. So individual belief systems that people believe in are driving a lot of this, but history just simply can't be denied. And the impact of history on this country and persons of color in this country cannot be denied. And this is not about singling out individual students or student groups. It's about a broad-based, important historical correction of knowledge and history that has long been out of our education system, and it needs to be inserted and capped there, and with a high degree of teacher and educator professional development. I think only then will that be you know,
Yeah.
responsible.
Did you feel, I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your perspectives on it, is the need to focus much of your efforts on youth and school age children, and what do you think can be done in that regard? And in addition to the professional development for their teachers, just in general, from the approach of a school and school department?
I mean, this is so much on the grown-ups. This is so much on the grown-ups, not to just do the academic internalization of history and of the impact of enslavement on this country and society, and specifically Black and Brown persons. It's really big work for the grown-ups, because creating a holding space to be able to teach some of these complicated concepts is so important. So grown-ups, teachers, facilitators, educators, parents. Parents have a good bit of educating themselves to do as well. And I think kids have a really solid, simple understanding of things that usually gets messed up by grown-ups.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's so much to be hopeful for in terms of, imagine if we did have a way in which history and critical race theory could be delivered in safe, transformational ways. And civics related to those topics about how to move in society as a voting body and as an individual that has an opportunity to be in service of these systems, to understand these systems in ways. I mean, I can't imagine the opportunity there. It is opportunity. We know diversity is more economically sound, and everything is better and prospers more when you've got diversity in a responsible way at the table. So I have great hope, and I think the way that I think a lot of school systems, I think including Westerly, from what I know, and I don't consider myself an expert. I've had some good conversations, and but I don't know what's really happening, but I do think that they're moving in a spirit of truth and reflection on what they need to do as grown-ups to better serve children, and putting up with a lot of pushback that feels like a real energy drain on what could be a focus on children in a different and responsible and loving and beautiful way.
Great, thank you. So, in your efforts in becoming involved in this, I'm sure everything was not here right away, and you have probably had to educate yourselves in many ways. You certainly have some firsthand knowledge of what you're trying to accomplish, but what are some resources or readings or things that you might recommend to the listening audience to help them, get some of the perspective that we talked about earlier?
Um,
Anything in particular?
I'll say for myself, there's always a couple of things that I like to recommend. First one being John Lewis's graphic novel March. It's just
March, is that the name of it? March?
March. Yes, it's a 3-part graphic novel that basically tells the story of the civil rights movement and why it is still important today. And John Lewis has been just such a probably the most influential civil rights leader for me personally, and just it. We all see the basic outlines of the civil rights movement and our basic education, but to see the personal toll that it took on those leaders and what it took to get organized and the forces that organized against them, it personalizes it so much, and it just lets the reader say like, wow, that was what it took. No wonder these people are trying to organize now and do similar things, because there are forces out there that I couldn't quite imagine people being that frankly evil to these protesters. In the realm of podcasting, oh man, of course everything is gonna leave my head. I like, there's a couple podcasts I like, and maybe this is off brand a little bit, but Jamel Hill is Unbothered is just a great, to understand Black culture and understand, she has a great introduction on what people, what the culture is thinking about certain news items. And it may be may not be entry level listening, but it definitely gets people involved. In April,
I've got
I'll send
a
it
few.
to you.
Yeah, I've got a few. There's definitely a few. I'm trying to see if one of the books over here. I love the podcast Seeing White. It's a series under Seen on the Radio. Seeing White. It's just a great series about what white people can learn about diversity in history. It's wonderful. I love the book called The Person You Mean to Be by Dolly Chugh. The Person You Mean to Be. I love that book. I think it's very instructive about, how to look at your own biases. And I love narrative. I have Nat King Cole's biography. That's the big one there. I love biographies. I think they do tell really beautiful stories, especially of folks like Harry Belafonte and Nat King Cole, folks who really, Billie Holiday, folks who really were groundbreaking both in their artistry and also their activism. And the last thing I would say about all of that is it's really now an opportunity to also talk about these things with other folks. I often think some of this content can be so heavy and so activating that, like, having other people to talk about it. So find a buddy. Not everybody has to be in a reading group or gab on about things in a group of folks, but just find one person to talk to and process the information. I think that's really part of the internalization of something and the growth, where that knowledge can stay and be active. And then we have a lending library. So please, folks, if you're listening, come to our Sunday protest. We have a lending library, and Eric, who is an extension of our group, and Juliet, who are there each Sunday, really do have a lot of good words for some of the recommendations we put. So knowledge is power, and as is conversation and connection.
Beautiful. So just a quick reflection on the Sunday morning gatherings on the post office steps. You're there, people can come, they can talk and hear and discuss and converse and understand. So this flew by. I mean, you were really amazing. There's no question about your passion and your desire to get this done and make it right. And I can't wait to see how we progress. I think that, in our next meeting, I know one of the discussions is going to be the possibility of talking to you again down the road. And I hope that you will certainly accommodate us and do that. It's been great. I don't see any questions on the screen. We're right on the last 30 seconds here, but I just want to thank you. Is there anything that either one of you just want to highlight for the last little bit here? April, Kevin, either one.
A thank you, a big heartfelt thank you to the library in Wilcox Park, to you, Lou, to Amanda, to Bridget, for all of your, your goodness and your grace and your willingness to steer into these conversations and to model what it looks like to talk about hard things sometimes. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you. Kevin, I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having us as well, and being so well curated. And I just want to tell everybody, like, we're about to come up on a year of protesting at the at the library, so, or excuse me, at the post office, and so definitely look forward to some announcements coming from ARC in the future to mark that year.
Great. That's what I think people would look forward to. When situations like this, there is a human nature part of it. People want to see tangible. They know about your group. They know that there's protest, but they want to see the tangible evidence of what has happened. And that's tricky for organizations like yours. So I hope that down the road that can happen. I think it'll validate some of the things that you're doing, right? So thanks again. Really appreciate it. If we have any questions that come along, we'll send them your way.
Please do. Appreciate you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Take care.
Thank you.
Good night, guys. Thank you.